Marcus Thompson stopped mid-stride on the Golden Gate Bridge walkway, his 3-year-old daughter Lily heavy in his arms, coffee cup slipping from his frozen fingers. There, silhouetted against the October sunset, stood a young woman in a designer dress on the outer railing, her bare feet balanced on the narrow ledge, arms spread like broken wings. This wasn't another evening commuter heading home. This was someone preparing to die. Lily stirred against his chest, her small hand gripping his work shirt as the coffee cup shattered on the pavement below, the sharp crack echoing across the bay. An elderly woman with silver hair gasped from a nearby bench, her knitting needles clattering to the ground, eyes wide with recognition of what they were witnessing. The girl on the ledge had been Marcus's daughter's age once, someone's precious child, someone's everything. Now she swayed gently in the wind, 22 years of life reduced to this single, terrible moment. "Don't jump!" Marcus shouted, already running toward her, his heart hammering against his ribs. Who was she, and how many seconds did he have left to save her? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Thompson had been carrying weight on his shoulders for 14 months now, ever since Sarah's last breath escaped her lips in that sterile hospital room. At 32, his calloused hands told the story of a man who'd learned that love wasn't enough to pay medical bills, that hope couldn't negotiate with cancer, and that sometimes the cruelest thing about losing everything was still having something left to lose. His Oakland apartment bore the scars of their struggle, Sarah's medical equipment still stacked in corners he couldn't bear to clear, prescription bottles lined up like tiny tombstones on the kitchen counter. The electricity bill, marked final notice in red ink, lay buried under a stack of past-due medical invoices that followed him like ghosts. 70-hour work weeks as an electrical contractor barely kept food on the table and a roof over Lily's head, but Marcus had made peace with exhaustion. It was easier than making peace with the alternative. Lily Thompson was 3 years old and saw the world in colors that didn't exist in any crayon box. Her autism spectrum traits made her hypersensitive to emotions, reading faces like weather patterns, and she'd been asking lately why Daddy's colors were always the dark ones. Her favorite stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, went everywhere with her, a tattered gray guardian that had absorbed 1,000 tears and whispered secrets. Sarah had bought it during her last good week when they still believed in miracles. 22 stories above them, in a Pacific Heights penthouse that overlooked the very bridge where Marcus now stood, lived a different kind of broken. Sophia Whitfield possessed everything money could buy and nothing her heart needed. Her father's $2.3 billion real estate empire cast shadows that reached into every corner of her life, turning relationships into negotiations and love into leverage. At Stanford, she'd majored in art, but minored in disappointment, watching classmates worry about grades while she worried about whether anyone would ever see her as more than a trust fund with legs. The genetic counselor's envelope had arrived 3 days ago, confirming what she'd suspected since her mother's death at 45. BRCA1 positive, carrying the family curse that turned breasts into time bombs and hope into a countdown. Her engagement to Derek Morrison, announced in the society pages without her consent, felt like watching her life auctioned to the highest bidder. Her father called it protection. She called it a prettier version of prison. 60 feet below the bridge deck, Eleanor Hartwell sat on her usual bench, silver hair catching the late afternoon light as her arthritic fingers worked yarn into something beautiful. At 78, she'd buried 3 husbands and delivered more babies than she could count during her 40 years as a labor and delivery nurse. Her daily walks to the bridge weren't about exercise. They were about watching, waiting, and believing that sometimes the universe put the right people in the right place at exactly the right time. The bridge stretched between worlds, Oakland's working-class determination and San Francisco's glittering wealth, with Eleanor as its unlikely guardian angel, counting souls and keeping secrets that would change everything. The distance between Marcus and the woman on the railing felt like miles, though it couldn't have been more than 50 feet. Each step sent jolts of panic through his chest as he watched her sway in the evening breeze, her dark hair whipping around a face he couldn't yet see clearly. Lily's weight in his arms seemed to anchor him to reality, even as everything else tilted toward nightmare. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice cracking with desperation, "please, just wait a minute." The woman turned her head slightly, and Marcus caught his first clear glimpse of Sophia Whitfield's face. Even from this distance, he could see the tears streaming down her cheeks, the way her knuckles had gone white, gripping the cable behind her. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 20s, with the kind of fragile beauty that belonged in art museums, not balanced on bridge railings. "Stay back," she whispered, though the wind nearly swallowed her words. "You don't understand." "This is the only way." Eleanor Hartwell had risen from her bench, her knitting forgotten as she approached with surprising speed for her age. Her pale blue eyes, sharp as winter sky, took in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen too much tragedy in her long life. Without a word, she held out her arms for Lily. "Give me the child," Eleanor said softly to Marcus. "You can't do what you need to do while holding her." Marcus hesitated for a heartbeat. He'd never seen this woman before, had no reason to trust her, but something in her weathered face spoke of absolute reliability. Lily went to Eleanor without protest, as if sensing the old woman's steady strength. "Angel lady sad," Lily observed, pointing toward Sophia with the brutal honesty of childhood. "She's the hurt color." Freed from his daughter's weight, Marcus moved closer to the railing, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "My name is Marcus," he said, his voice steadier now. "What's yours?" "It doesn't matter," Sophia replied, her voice hollow. "Nothing matters anymore." "Everything matters," Marcus countered, edging closer. "Especially right now. Especially to the people who love you." Sophia let out a bitter laugh that broke Marcus's heart. "Love? My father loves his business deals. My fiancé loves my trust fund. Nobody loves me. They love what I represent." Marcus could see the designer label on her dress now, the expensive shoes she'd kicked off and left on the walkway behind her. Everything about her screamed wealth, privilege, a life he could never touch. But her pain, that was universal, as familiar to him as his own reflection. "You're wrong," he said, close enough now to see the mascara streaks on her cheeks. "I don't know you, don't know your story, but I know you matter. That little girl over there? She called you an angel?" 3-year-olds don't lie about things like that. Behind them, Eleanor had pulled out an old cell phone, but instead of calling 911, she was dialing a different number. "Cancel the alert," she murmured to someone on the other end. "We've got this handled." Sophia's legs trembled with fatigue and fear. She'd been standing on this ledge for nearly an hour, working up the courage that kept abandoning her at the last second. "You don't understand. I'm going to die anyway. The doctors, they found—" Her voice broke. "I have the same thing that killed my mother. It's in my genes, like some family curse." "So fight it," Marcus said fiercely. "Whatever it is, fight it. Don't let it win without a battle." "Easy for you to say. You probably don't even have health insurance." The words stung because they were true, but Marcus pushed the pain aside. "You're right, I don't. Lost it when my wife got sick. Watched her die because we couldn't afford the treatment that might have saved her." He saw Sophia's eyes widen with shock. "But you know what I learned? The worst thing isn't dying, it's giving up before you have to." Tears began flowing harder down Sophia's face. "I can't do this anymore. The pressure, the expectations, feeling like I'm just a chess piece in someone else's game. Then stop playing their game, Marcus said simply. Start playing your own. A gust of wind caught Sophia off guard, and her foot slipped. Marcus lunged forward, his hand closing around her wrist just as she began to fall. The impact nearly pulled him over the railing, his ribs slamming against the metal barrier with a sickening crack. Behind them, Lily began to cry, and Eleanor's voice rose in urgent prayer. "I've got you," Marcus gasped, his shoulders screaming in agony as he held Sophia's full weight. "I've got you. Just grab the railing with your other hand." For a terrifying moment, Sophia just hung there, suspended between life and death by Marcus's desperate grip. Then, slowly, she reached up and grasped the cable. With Marcus's help, Sophia managed to swing her leg back over the railing, collapsing onto the bridge walkway in a shaking heap. Her designer dress was torn, her knees scraped and bleeding, but she was alive. Marcus slumped against the barrier, clutching his ribs where they'd connected with the metal, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Eleanor approached slowly, still holding Lily, who had stopped crying and was now staring at Sophia with the intense curiosity only children possessed. "Child," Eleanor said softly, kneeling beside Sophia, "you're safe now." Sophia looked up at the elderly woman, then at Marcus, then at the little girl whose huge brown eyes seemed to see straight into her soul. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you save me? You don't even know me." Marcus struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as pain shot through his torso. "Because someone needed saving," he said simply. "And because that little girl there has already lost one mother. She didn't need to watch someone else's daughter die today." The words hung in the air like a bridge between their worlds. Sophia studied Marcus's face, seeing past the work clothes and calloused hands to something she'd never encountered in her privileged circles, genuine compassion without agenda. "You said you lost your wife," Sophia said quietly. "To the same thing I'm facing." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Breast cancer. Sarah fought for 2 years. We sold everything, mortgaged the future, borrowed against hope itself. In the end, it wasn't enough." He looked at Lily, who had somehow wiggled free from Eleanor's arms and was now approaching Sophia with her stuffed elephant. "This is Mr. Peanuts," Lily announced solemnly, offering the worn toy to Sophia. "He makes the sad go away." Sophia accepted the elephant with trembling hands, and for the first time in months, her tears weren't from despair, but from something warmer. "Thank you," she whispered to the little girl. "He's perfect." Eleanor watched the exchange with knowing eyes. "Young man," she said to Marcus, "those ribs need looking at. And this child," she gestured to Sophia, "needs somewhere safe to spend the night. My apartment isn't far." "I can't," Sophia protested. "My father will be looking for me. There'll be consequences." "Let there be consequences," Eleanor interrupted with surprising firmness. "Sometimes the only way forward is through the storm." She extended a weathered hand to help Sophia to her feet. "I'm Eleanor Hartwell. I've been a nurse for 40 years, and I can spot a soul in crisis from a mile away. You need healing, child, and healing takes time." As they walked slowly toward Eleanor's building, Sophia found herself between Marcus and the old woman, with Lily skipping ahead, still clutching her elephant. The setting sun painted the bay in shades of gold and crimson, and for the first time since receiving her test results, Sophia felt something other than dread. Your wife," she said to Marcus as they climbed the steps to Eleanor's modest apartment building. "What was she like?" Marcus's expression softened. "Sarah was light. She could find joy in a grocery store coupon or a perfect cup of coffee. When she got sick, she made me promise not to let the darkness win." He glanced at Sophia. "I think I've been breaking that promise for 14 months." Eleanor's apartment was a testament to a life well lived, Photographs spanning decades, handmade quilts draped over comfortable furniture, and the lingering scent of lavender and old books. She immediately set about making tea while Marcus settled carefully into an armchair, still favoring his injured ribs. "There's something you both should know," Eleanor said as she moved around her small kitchen with practiced efficiency. "I didn't just happen to be at that bridge tonight. I've been going there every evening for 3 months, ever since I had a dream about a young woman who needed saving." Sophia and Marcus exchanged glances. "A dream?" Sophia asked. Eleanor nodded, returning with steaming mugs. "At my age, you learn to pay attention to such things. I saw a girl with dark hair and a broken heart, and a man carrying more than just his child." She settled into her rocking chair. "I also saw an old woman who had one more purpose to fulfill before her time was up." The weight of those words settled over the small room. Lily had curled up on the couch next to Sophia, who was absently stroking the child's hair while holding Mr. Peanuts. "I don't understand what's happening to me," Sophia admitted. "6 months ago I had my whole life planned out, or at least my father had it planned out for me. College, engagement, marriage, children, all in the proper order. Then the genetic testing came back and suddenly I'm facing the same fate as my mother and nothing makes sense anymore." Marcus leaned forward despite the pain in his ribs. What if nothing was supposed to make sense? What if the plan was wrong from the beginning? "Easy to say when you're not facing a 85% chance of cancer by age 50, Sophia replied, but her tone was more sad than bitter. "No," Marcus said quietly, "but I am facing raising a daughter alone on $30,000 a year, wondering every day if I'm failing her the way I failed her mother." He looked at Lily, who had fallen asleep against Sophia's shoulder. "The difference is, you still have choices. You still have time." Eleanor rocked slowly in her chair, watching the two young people with the satisfaction of someone whose prayers had been answered. "Time," she repeated. "The most precious gift we have, and the one we're quickest to waste on fear." Outside, the first stars were appearing over San Francisco Bay, and somewhere in a Pacific Heights mansion, phones were ringing and security teams were being mobilized. But in Eleanor's cozy living room, 3 strangers had become something more. A family born of crisis, held together by hope. 3 weeks passed like a dream, wrapped in the ordinary magic of daily routines. Sophia had officially moved into Eleanor's spare bedroom, a cozy space filled with quilts and the gentle morning light that filtered through lace curtains. Each dawn brought small revelations, the way Marcus hummed while making coffee, how Lily arranged her toys in precise color patterns, the comfort of Eleanor's steady presence as she moved through her apartment like a guardian angel in practical shoes. Marcus's ribs had healed enough for him to return to work, though he still winced when lifting heavy equipment. What surprised him most was how natural it felt to have Sophia waiting when he came home, usually sitting on the floor with Lily, both of them covered in finger paint or crayon shavings. The apartment that had felt like a mausoleum for 14 months was suddenly alive with laughter and the sound of 3-year-old chatter. "Mama Sophie, look!" Lily would exclaim, holding up her latest artistic creation. The casual use of "mama" had shocked them all the first time it happened, but Sophia had simply smiled and praised the drawing as if she'd been born to receive such gifts. The transformation in Sophia was remarkable. The hollow-eyed woman who had stood on the bridge railing had been replaced by someone who lit up when teaching Lily to mix colors or helping Marcus calculate electrical loads for his contracting jobs. She'd discovered she had an intuitive understanding of circuits and wiring that amazed Marcus, often spotting potential problems before he did. "My father would be horrified," she'd said one evening, wiping electrical grease from her hands after helping Marcus repair a junction box. "Whitfield women aren't supposed to get their hands dirty." "Maybe Whitfield women haven't been living," Marcus had replied, and the kiss that followed tasted like possibility and future dreams. But the outside world was closing in. Richard Whitfield's private investigators had been methodically working their way through San Francisco, following paper trails and security camera footage. The engagement to Derek Morrison remained officially active, with wedding planning proceeding despite the bride's absence. Society pages speculated about Sophia's breakdown and recovery retreat, while Derek publicly played the role of the patient, understanding fiancé. Eleanor watched it all unfold with the wisdom of someone who had lived through 8 decades of human drama. She'd been receiving calls, carefully neutral conversations with people who asked seemingly innocent questions about her routine, her neighbors, her daily walks to the bridge. She knew they were closing in, but she also knew that some transformations couldn't be rushed. "Child," she said to Sophia one morning while they prepared breakfast, "your father's going to find you soon. Have you thought about what you'll tell him?" Sophia paused in her pancake flipping, the domesticity of the moment feeling both foreign and perfectly right. "I don't know. How do you explain to someone that you've discovered who you really are by almost losing yourself completely?" Marcus entered the kitchen, his hair still damp from the shower, and wrapped his arms around Sophia from behind. The gesture was so natural, so full of unconscious affection, that Eleanor smiled to herself. Some things couldn't be faked or forced. They simply were. "Whatever happens," Marcus said quietly, "we'll face it together." Lily bounced into the kitchen, her hair in the lopsided pigtails that Sophia had learned to make, carrying Mr. Peanuts and a drawing tablet. "Family breakfast," she announced, as if this had been their routine for years rather than weeks. The word family hung in the air, acknowledged but not discussed, like a butterfly too precious to catch. They'd all begun to feel it, the invisible threads that connected them, the way their lives had begun to interweave without conscious decision. Marcus found himself buying Sophia's favorite tea without being asked. Sophia had memorized Lily's bedtime ritual and could calm the little girl's occasional meltdowns with a patience that amazed them all. Eleanor had become their anchor, the wise grandmother who had somehow orchestrated this unlikely union. That afternoon, while Marcus was at a job site and Lily napped, Sophia and Eleanor sat in the small garden behind the apartment building. Eleanor was teaching her to knit, their hands working yarn into something beautiful and useful. "I need to tell you something," Eleanor said suddenly, her needles never pausing in their rhythm. "About the night I found you on the bridge." Sophia looked up from her tangled stitches. "What about it?" "It wasn't coincidence, child. I'd been dreaming about you for months. Seeing a young woman with dark hair standing on that bridge, and a man with a little girl who would save her." Eleanor's eyes were distant, remembering. "I've had dreams like that before. When I was younger, I ignored them. But after 78 years, you learn to pay attention to the things that matter. You're saying you knew I would be there?" "I knew someone would be there who needed saving. I knew Marcus would be the one to do it. What I didn't know was how perfectly you would fit into the spaces in each other's lives." Eleanor reached over and corrected one of Sophia's stitches with gentle fingers. "Sometimes the universe gives us exactly what we need, disguised as what we think we can't survive." Their peaceful afternoon was shattered by the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside. Through the window, Sophia could see black SUVs and a familiar silver Mercedes. Her blood turned to ice. "He's here," she whispered. Eleanor set down her knitting with deliberate calm. "Then it's time, child. Time to choose who you really are." The knock on the door was firm and authoritative. Eleanor answered it with the dignity of someone who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Richard Whitfield stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security personnel and his longtime attorney, James Crawford. At 58, Richard was still an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with eyes that had learned to calculate value in everything they saw. "Mr. Whitfield," Eleanor said politely, "I've been expecting you." Richard stepped into the modest apartment, his gaze immediately finding Sophia, who had risen from the couch with Lily's coloring book still in her hands. The contrast was stark, his tailored suit and commanding presence against her jeans and paint-stained shirt, the simple domestic scene that spoke of a life he couldn't comprehend. "Sophia." His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the relief underneath. "Thank God you're safe. We need to go home." "I am home," Sophia said quietly, and the words seemed to surprise her with their certainty. Richard's eyes swept the apartment, taking in the second-hand furniture, the family photos that didn't include his daughter, the evidence of a life lived on a budget that wouldn't cover his monthly car payment. "This is not your home. This is temporary insanity, and it ends now." "Dad," Sophia began. "No." Richard's voice cut through the air like a blade. "I've been patient. I've allowed this episode to run its course, but you have responsibilities. Derek has been understanding, but there are limits. The wedding is in 6 weeks, and I'm not marrying Derek." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stared at his daughter as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "Of course you're marrying Derek. Everything is arranged." "The merger depends. I don't care about the merger." Sophia's voice was stronger now, finding its footing. "I don't care about the wedding or the society pages or what people will think. I care about building something real with someone who loves me for who I am, not what I represent." Richard's laugh was bitter. "And who is this paragon of virtue? The electrician? Sophia, be realistic. What kind of future could you possibly have with someone like that?" The front door opened, and Marcus stepped inside, still in his work clothes, tool belt slung over his shoulder. He took in the scene immediately, the expensive suits, the tension crackling through the air, Sophia standing with her chin raised in defiance. "Mr. Whitfield," Marcus said evenly. "I'm Marcus Thompson." Richard turned his calculating gaze on the younger man, and Sophia could practically see him adding up the cost of Marcus's clothes, his modest appearance, his obvious working-class status. "So you're the one who's been filling my daughter's head with romantic nonsense." "I'm the one who loves your daughter," Marcus replied simply. "And who she loves in return." Love. Richard spat the word like a curse. Love doesn't pay medical bills. Love doesn't provide security. Love is a luxury people like you can't afford, and my daughter has never lived without luxury. Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, confused by the raised voices and strange people in their safe space. Without hesitation, she ran to Sophia, who picked her up and held her close. "Mama, Sophie, why is the scary man yelling?" The word mama hit Richard like a physical blow. He stared at the little girl in his daughter's arms, seeing something in Sophia's face he hadn't seen since she was Lily's age, pure protective love. "Sophia," he said, his voice softer now, "this fantasy has to end. You have a genetic predisposition to breast cancer. You need the best medical care money can buy. You need security, stability." "I need love," Sophia interrupted fiercely. "I need purpose. I need to feel like I matter as a person, not just as an extension of your empire." She looked at Marcus, then at Eleanor, then at Lily in her arms. "I've found my family, Dad. They may not have your money, but they have everything that actually matters." Richard's face went white with rage and something that might have been fear. "If you walk away from this life, you walk away from everything. The trust fund, the inheritance, the family name, gone. You'll be cut off completely." "Then cut me off," Sophia said, and her voice never wavered. I'd rather be poor and loved than rich and empty." The battle lines had been drawn, and everyone in that small apartment knew that whatever happened next would change all their lives forever. The confrontation that followed would be remembered by everyone in Eleanor's small apartment as the moment when worlds collided and nothing would ever be the same. Richard Whitfield stood in the center of the modest living room like a general surveying enemy territory, his steel-gray eyes moving from his daughter to Marcus with the cold calculation of someone accustomed to winning every battle. "You think this is love?" Richard's voice dripped with disdain as he gestured toward Marcus. "This man sees a lonely, vulnerable billionaire's daughter, and you call it destiny? Sophia, you're smarter than this." Marcus stepped forward, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "Sir, with all due respect, you don't know anything about me or what I feel for your daughter." "I know enough," Richard shot back. "I know you're an electrician living paycheck to paycheck. I know you have a child to support and bills you can barely pay. I know that my daughter represents a solution to all your financial problems wrapped up in a pretty package." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Sophia felt Marcus tense beside her, saw the way his hands clenched into fists, and recognized the particular kind of pain that comes from having your character assassinated by someone who's never bothered to know you. "That's not true," Sophia said firmly. "Dad, you're wrong about him." "Am I?" Richard pulled out his phone and began reading from the screen. Marcus Thompson, age 32, widowed 14 months ago when his wife Sarah died of breast cancer. Medical bills totaling $847,000, of which $623,000 remains unpaid. Current income approximately $32,000 annually. Behind on rent, truck payments, and utilities. He looked up with triumph in his eyes. "Tell me, Mr. Thompson, how exactly do you plan to provide for my daughter's medical needs when her genetic testing indicates a high probability of the same disease that killed your wife?" The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He hadn't realized how thoroughly he'd been investigated, how completely his private pain had been catalogued and weaponized. Beside him, he felt Sophia go rigid with shock. "You investigated him?" she whispered. "Of course I investigated him," Richard replied coldly. "Did you think I'd let my daughter associate with a complete stranger without knowing who he really was? This man couldn't save his own wife, Sophia. What makes you think he can save you?" Eleanor, who had been sitting quietly in her rocking chair throughout the confrontation, suddenly stood with a dignity that commanded attention. "That's enough," she said. And despite her soft-spoken nature, there was steel in her voice that stopped Richard mid-sentence. "Ma'am, this is a family matter," Richard began. "This is my home," Eleanor interrupted. "And that young man has shown more courage and integrity in 3 weeks than most people show in a lifetime." She moved to stand beside Marcus, her small frame somehow formidable. "You want to know about character, Mr. Whitfield? Your daughter was standing on a bridge railing ready to end her life because she couldn't see any other way out of the prison you'd built around her. This man risked his own life to save a complete stranger, putting his child at risk in the process. He did it because it was right, not because there was anything in it for him." Richard's face flushed with anger. "My daughter was having a temporary breakdown." "Your daughter was suffocating," Eleanor said flatly. "She was drowning in expectations and arrangements and a life that had nothing to do with who she actually is." The old woman's eyes blazed with a fire that belied her age. "I've delivered over 3,000 babies in my career, Mr. Whitfield. I've watched families form and break apart. I know love when I see it, and I know fear disguised as protection." Lily, still in Sophia's arms, began to cry at the raised voices and tension filling the room. Without thinking, Sophia began to rock her gently, murmuring soft reassurances. The natural maternal instinct was so obvious that even Richard couldn't miss it. "Look at her," Eleanor continued, gesturing toward Sophia. When has she ever looked more like herself than she does right now? When has she ever been happier? Happiness is temporary, Richard snapped. Security is forever. Is it? Marcus spoke for the first time since Richard's devastating revelation, his voice quiet but steady. Because I thought I had security once. Good job, nice house, health insurance, the whole American dream. And you know what I learned? Security is an illusion. The only thing that's real is what you choose to fight for when everything else falls apart. He looked directly at Richard, no longer intimidated by the older man's wealth or power. You're right about the medical bills, you're right about my income, you're right that I couldn't save Sarah, but you're wrong about why I love your daughter. I love her because she sees colors in sunsets that most people miss. I love her because she taught my daughter to paint rainbows when all Lily knew before was gray. I love her because she's strong enough to choose happiness over security, which is something you apparently never learned. Richard's face went white. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Marcus's voice rose slightly, but it was passion, not anger. Your daughter almost died because she'd rather be dead than live the life you planned for her. Doesn't that tell you something about the value of your so-called security? The room fell silent except for Lily's sniffling. Sophia felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the two men she loved most in the world face off over her future. Marcus, standing with his shoulders squared despite the pain in his ribs, defending not just their love but her right to choose her own path. Her father, rigid with the fear that had driven him since her mother's death, unable to see that his protection had become a cage. "Dad," she said softly, and something in her voice made everyone turn. "Do you remember what Mom used to say about love?" Richard's jaw tightened. Sophia. She used to say that love wasn't about holding on so tight that you suffocated what you loved. She said it was about having enough faith to let go and trust that if it was real, it would choose to stay. Sophia's voice grew stronger. "You're not protecting me, Dad. You're suffocating me." "Just like you suffocated her." The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Richard went perfectly still, his face a mask of controlled fury and something that might have been recognition. "Your mother died in a car accident," he said through gritted teeth. "Mom died running away from the life you built around her," Sophia replied, and the words seemed to surprise her with their clarity. "She was coming to see me at school because she couldn't stand another board meeting, another charity gala, another night pretending to be happy in a marriage that had become a business arrangement." Richard's composure finally cracked. "That's not true. She loved our life. She loved what we built together." "She loved you," Sophia corrected, "but she hated what you'd become." "And if you keep going down this path, if you force me into the same cage you put her in, you're going to lose me the same way you lost her." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Richard's harsh breathing and Lily's quieter sniffles. Eleanor moved closer to the group, her presence somehow calming despite the emotional storm swirling around them. "Mr. Whitfield," Eleanor said gently, "I knew your wife." Everyone turned to stare at her. Richard's face went pale. "What?" "Margaret came to see me 3 times in the months before she died. She was my patient when Sophia was born, and she remembered me. She was troubled about something, needed someone to talk to who wasn't part of your world." Eleanor's voice was compassionate but firm. "She wasn't running from you, son. She was running to something. She was trying to find her way back to the man she'd fallen in love with before success changed him into someone she didn't recognize." Richard's legs seemed to give out, and he sank into Eleanor's armchair as if the weight of 22 years had suddenly settled on his shoulders. "She never said anything." "Because she was afraid," Eleanor continued. afraid that if she told you how unhappy she was, you'd try to fix it the same way you fixed everything else, with money and control and grand gestures that missed the point entirely. The revelation hung in the air, reshaping everything they thought they knew about the past. Sophia felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of anger she'd carried for so long it had become part of her identity. "Dad," she whispered, setting Lily down and moving toward her father, "I don't want your money. I don't want the life you planned for me. I want the chance to build something real with someone who loves me for who I am, not who you think I should be." Richard looked up at his daughter, and for the first time in years she saw not the ruthless businessman, but the broken man who'd been grieving alone for 2 decades. The battle for Sophia's future was far from over, but in that moment, something fundamental had changed. The ground had shifted, and none of them would ever be quite the same. What happened next would later be described by everyone present as watching a man's world crumble in real time. Richard Whitfield sat in Eleanor's armchair, his perfectly pressed suit somehow looking disheveled, his hands shaking as 22 years of carefully constructed beliefs collapsed around him like a house of cards in an earthquake. "She wanted to leave me," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Margaret was leaving me." Eleanor knelt beside his chair with the practiced grace of someone who had comforted grieving families for 4 decades. "No, son, she was trying to find you, the man she married, the man who used to take her on picnics in Golden Gate Park and talk about changing the world instead of owning it." The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. He doubled over, his face in his hands, as sobs racked his body with the force of suppressed grief finally finding release. "I thought I was protecting her, protecting Sophia. I thought if I could just build something big enough, strong enough, nothing could hurt them." "But you built a fortress instead of a home," Sophia said softly, moving closer to her father. "And fortresses keep love out as much as they keep danger away." Marcus watched the scene unfold with a mixture of compassion and wariness. He understood the power of grief to reshape a man's entire reality. He'd lived it himself for 14 months, but he also knew that understanding someone's pain didn't automatically excuse the damage they'd caused. "Mr. Whitfield," Marcus said quietly, "I know what it's like to lose the person you love most in the world. I know what it's like to feel like you failed them. But I also know that Sophia isn't your wife. She's not a second chance to get it right. She's her own person with her own life to live." Richard looked up at Marcus through tear-filled eyes. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see her mother's spirit in her every day?" His voice was raw with pain. "I've been terrified since the day she was born that I'd lose her the same way I lost Margaret. When the genetic testing came back positive, when I saw that same death sentence hanging over her head..." He broke off, unable to continue. Lily, who had been watching the adults with the solemn intensity of a child trying to understand a world suddenly gone wrong, picked up Mr. Peanuts and toddled over to Richard. Without a word, she held out the worn stuffed elephant to the man who minutes before had seemed so frightening. "Mr. Peanuts makes the sad go away," she said simply. The gesture was so innocent, so purely kind, that it broke something inside Richard. He accepted the toy with trembling hands and pulled the little girl onto his lap, holding her as if she were a lifeline. "Thank you, sweetheart," he whispered against her hair. Eleanor stood slowly, her knees protesting after so much emotional intensity. "Margaret came to me because she was pregnant again," she said quietly, and the room went silent. "She lost the baby at 12 weeks, a little boy. She never told you because she knew you'd blame yourself somehow. Find some way to make it about not providing enough, not protecting enough." Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I had a brother?" You would have, Eleanor confirmed. She was going to tell you, Richard. The night she died, she was driving to Sophia's school to pick her up early so they could come home and tell you together. She thought maybe a new baby would help you remember what really mattered. The weight of 22 years of misunderstanding settled over the room like a thick fog. Richard held Lily tighter. This child who wasn't his, but who had somehow become a bridge between his grief and his redemption. "I've been so wrong," he whispered. "About everything. About what Margaret wanted, about what Sophia needs, about what actually matters." He looked at Marcus with eyes that seemed to have aged decades in minutes. "I investigated you because I was terrified that my daughter would make the same mistake I thought her mother had made, choosing love over security. But Margaret didn't make a mistake. I did. I'm the one who forgot that love is the only security that actually matters." The apology hung in the air, tentative and fragile. Marcus felt Sophia's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his as they faced this moment that would either heal a family or destroy it completely. "Mr. Whitfield," Marcus said carefully, "I can't promise that Sophia will never face the same health challenges her mother did. I can't promise that we'll never struggle financially or that life will be easy. But I can promise that I will love her with everything I have, for as long as we have, without trying to change her into someone else." Richard nodded slowly, still holding Lily, who had curled up against his chest as if sensing that this frightening grown-up needed comfort. "And if the genetic testing proves accurate? If she develops the same cancer that killed her mother? Then we'll fight it together," Marcus said simply. "All of us. With whatever resources we have and whatever strength we can find. But we'll fight it as a family, not as a business arrangement." Sophia felt tears streaming down her face as she watched her father's transformation. The man who had seemed like an immovable force of nature was revealing himself to be just as broken and frightened as she had been on the bridge. "Dad," she said softly, "I don't need you to fix everything. I just need you to love me." "I do love you," Richard whispered. "I've loved you so much that I lost sight of how to show it. I've been so afraid of losing you that I drove you away." Eleanor moved to the kitchen and returned with a box of tissues, distributing them with the practical kindness of someone who had seen countless families work through their deepest pain. "Love isn't about preventing all suffering," she said gently. "It's about being present for whatever comes. Margaret knew that. She chose to love you despite the risks, just like Sophia is choosing to love Marcus." The parallel was clear, and Richard felt another piece of his carefully constructed worldview crumble. His wife hadn't been naive or reckless. She had been brave, and his daughter was showing the same courage. "The engagement to Derek," Richard said suddenly, as if remembering something important. "It's not just about the merger. Derek's been persistent, aggressive. When you disappeared, he threatened to make things difficult for the company if the wedding didn't happen as planned." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of threats?" "Business threats, mostly. But Derek has connections, political influence. He could make life very unpleasant for anyone who crossed him." Richard's eyes met Marcus's directly. "I was trying to protect Sophia from having to deal with that kind of vindictive behavior." "By forcing her to marry him?" Sophia's voice was incredulous. "By handling the situation in a way that would keep you safe," Richard replied weakly. And even he seemed to realize how flawed the logic was. "Dad, I'm not fragile. I'm not something that needs to be kept in a display case. I'm a person who can handle whatever Derek Morrison throws at us, especially if I'm not handling it alone." She looked at Marcus, then back at her father. "This family, Marcus, Lily, Eleanor, me, and yes, you if you want to be part of it, this family can face anything, Because we face it together." The word family seemed to resonate through the room, redefining relationships and possibilities. Richard looked around at these people who had somehow become more important to his daughter than anything his money could provide, and for the first time in 22 years, he began to understand what Margaret had been trying to tell him. "What do you need from me?" he asked finally, and the question was addressed to all of them. "Just be present," Sophia said. "Be my father, not my protector or my manager. Let me make my own choices and my own mistakes, and love whatever family I choose to build, even if it doesn't look like what you planned." Richard nodded slowly, still holding Lily, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder. "And Derek?" "Leave Derek to me," Marcus said. And there was something in his voice that suggested the electrician from Oakland might be more formidable than anyone had imagined. The crisis wasn't over. Derek Morrison still lurked in their future like a storm cloud on the horizon. But something fundamental had shifted. The Whitfield fortress had developed cracks, and light was finally getting in. 3 days after Richard's emotional breakdown in Eleanor's living room, the world exploded in ways none of them had anticipated. Derek Morrison, discovering that his carefully arranged future was slipping through his fingers, decided to wage war using the most devastating weapons at his disposal: money, influence, and the ruthless machinery of social destruction. The first blow came at dawn when Marcus arrived at his latest job site to find it empty except for the construction foreman Jim Brady, a man he'd worked with for 2 years. Jim's face was grim as he approached Marcus's truck. "I'm sorry, Marcus," Jim said, not meeting his eyes. "The client pulled out. Said they got word you were unreliable." "Unreliable?" Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. "Jim, you know my work. I've never missed a deadline, never had a safety violation." "I know, man, I know." Jim's voice was heavy with regret. "But word's going around. Stories about you and some rich girl, about you being a gold digger, a con artist. The client got spooked." He handed Marcus an envelope. "This covers what you're owed for the work already done, but Marcus, I don't think I'm going to be able to use you anymore. Not until this blows over." By noon, Marcus had received similar calls from 3 other contractors. By evening, his phone had stopped ringing altogether. The Whisper campaign was surgical in its precision. Derek's people had identified every client, every contact, every source of income Marcus had, and systematically poisoned each well. Eleanor discovered the second part of Derek's strategy when she returned from grocery shopping to find 2 men in dark suits waiting by her apartment building. They flashed credentials that identified them as investigators from Child Protective Services. "Ma'am," the older one said, his voice professionally neutral, "we've received reports about unsafe living conditions for a minor child in your building. We need to speak with Marcus Thompson regarding his daughter." Eleanor's blood turned to ice, but her voice remained steady. "What kind of reports?" "Anonymous tips suggesting neglect, inappropriate living arrangements, exposure to unstable influences." The man consulted his tablet. "We understand there's been a significant change in the household dynamic recently." Inside the apartment, Sophia was helping Lily with a coloring book when Eleanor entered with the 2 investigators. Marcus, who had been reviewing the day's devastating job losses at the kitchen table, stood immediately, his face pale with recognition of what this meant. "Daddy?" Lily looked up from her crayons, sensing the tension in the room. "Are the men here to take me away?" The innocent question hit everyone like a physical blow. Marcus knelt beside his daughter, forcing his voice to remain calm. "No, sweetheart. These men just want to make sure you're happy and safe." The investigation that followed was thorough and invasive. The investigators photographed every room, questioned Lily with gentle but persistent probes, and documented everything from the contents of the refrigerator to the sleeping arrangements. They noted that Sophia had no official legal relationship to the child, that the living situation was unconventional, and that there had been recent disruptions to the household stability. "Mr. Thompson," the lead investigator said as they prepared to leave, "we'll need you to come in for a formal interview tomorrow. We'll also need contact information for reliable childcare while these matters are being resolved." After they left, the apartment felt like a crime scene. Lily clung to Sophia, confused and frightened by the strangers who had asked her so many questions. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, the weight of potential loss crushing down on him like a physical force. "This is Derek," Sophia said, her voice tight with fury. "This has his fingerprints all over it. The timing, the precision. He's not just trying to destroy us. He's trying to destroy you specifically, Marcus, to force me back." Eleanor, who had been unusually quiet since the investigators left, suddenly stood and walked to an old secretary desk in the corner of the living room. She pulled out a key and unlocked a drawer that Sophia had never seen opened. "I didn't want to do this," Eleanor said quietly, removing a manila folder thick with documents. "But that young man has pushed this too far." "Eleanor, what is that?" Marcus asked. The old woman's eyes were hard as winter steel. "Insurance," she said simply. "I've been a nurse for 40 years, child. I've delivered babies for senators' wives and congressmen's daughters. I've seen their medical records, heard their confessions, kept their secrets." She opened the folder, revealing photographs, medical documents, and what appeared to be legal papers, including Derek Morrison's. Sophia moved closer, studying the documents. What she saw made her gasp. "Eleanor, this is evidence of Derek's true character," Eleanor finished. "3 different women, Marcus, 3 different settlements for what the lawyers called aggressive courtship behavior, 1 hospitalization that was covered up, 2 restraining orders that were quietly dropped after financial compensation." Marcus felt sick. "He's done this before. And worse," Eleanor continued grimly. "The last young woman, Jennifer Walsh, ended up in a psychiatric facility after Derek's courtship. Her family was paid $2 million to keep quiet about what he did to her." The revelations painted a picture of systematic predatory behavior that had been carefully hidden behind money and legal maneuvering. Derek Morrison wasn't just an entitled rich man trying to force a marriage, he was dangerous. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Sophia demanded. Eleanor's weathered hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "Because I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. I hoped your father would handle things quietly, that Derek would accept your refusal and move on. But I should have known better. Men like Derek don't accept rejection. They escalate." The phone rang, cutting through the heavy silence. Marcus answered to find James Crawford, Richard's attorney, on the other end. "Marcus, I need you and Sophia to come to Richard's office immediately," Crawford said without preamble. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention." An hour later, they sat in Richard's luxurious office high above San Francisco, the city lights twinkling below like fallen stars. Richard looked older than he had 3 days ago, the emotional revelations having carved new lines around his eyes. But there was something else in his expression now, a cold determination that reminded everyone why he'd built an empire. "Derek made a mistake," Richard said without preamble. "He overplayed his hand." Crawford opened his own folder, revealing a different set of documents. "When Derek started his campaign against you, Marcus, he had to use his business connections to make it work. But those connections left a trail, emails, phone calls, financial transactions. We can prove he orchestrated the job losses, the CPS investigation, all of it." "That's not the mistake," Richard added grimly. "The mistake was threatening my daughter directly." He turned his computer screen toward them, revealing an email that made Sophia's blood run cold. It was from Derek, sent just hours earlier, and it was explicit in its threats. If Sophia didn't return and honor their engagement, he would ensure that Marcus lost custody of Lily permanently. More chilling, he detailed exactly what he planned to do to Sophia once they were married, describing a level of control and psychological manipulation that crossed every line. "He sent this to my business email," Richard explained. "I think he wanted me to pressure Sophia into compliance. Instead, he's given us everything we need to destroy him completely." Eleanor placed her folder on Richard's desk beside Crawford's documents. "And this provides the pattern of behavior that will make the charges stick." Marcus stared at the evidence spread across the mahogany surface, feeling a mixture of relief and rage. "What happens now?" "Now we fight back," Richard said, and for the first time since they'd met, Marcus heard something in the older man's voice that sounded like partnership rather than condescension. "Crawford has already filed for restraining orders against Derek on behalf of both you and Sophia. We've contacted the FBI regarding the systematic harassment and conspiracy charges, and we've prepared a very detailed dossier for the media about Derek's history with women." "The CPS investigation?" Sophia asked. "Will be dropped by morning," Crawford assured her. "When we present evidence that it was initiated through fraudulent reports, they'll have no choice but to close the case and potentially pursue charges against whoever filed the false reports." Marcus felt a weight lifting from his shoulders for the first time in days, but he was wary of accepting help that came with strings attached. "Mr. Whitfield, I appreciate this, but I need to know. What do you want in return?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, studying the younger man's face. "I want my daughter to be happy," he said finally. "I want her to be safe, and I want the chance to be the kind of father and grandfather I should have been all along." He paused. "If you'll let me." The offer hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. Marcus looked at Sophia, seeing the hope and love shining in her eyes, then at the evidence that would finally free them from Derek's threats. "Partners?" Marcus asked, extending his hand to Richard. "Partners," Richard confirmed, shaking it firmly. Outside the office windows, San Francisco glittered in the darkness, and somewhere in that maze of light and shadow, Derek Morrison was about to discover that threatening the wrong family could destroy everything he'd built. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Marcus and Sophia weren't fighting it alone. 6 months later, the Golden Gate Bridge stood bathed in the warm glow of a California sunset, its iconic towers reaching toward a sky painted in shades of coral and gold. The same spot where Sophia had once balanced on the edge of despair had been transformed into something miraculous, a place where love would be celebrated instead of lost. White roses and baby's breath lined the walkway, their delicate fragrance carried by the gentle bay breeze. A small gathering of folding chairs faced the spot where Marcus had first grabbed Sophia's hand, where Eleanor had mysteriously appeared with perfect timing, where 3 broken lives had somehow found a way to heal each other. Eleanor sat in the front row, resplendent in a lavender dress that brought out the silver in her hair, holding Lily on her lap. The little girl wore a white dress with pink ribbons, her hair adorned with tiny flowers, and clutched both Mr. Peanuts and a small basket of rose petals. At 4 years old now, she had blossomed under the love and stability that had defined the past months, her autism spectrum traits becoming simply part of the beautiful complexity that made her uniquely herself. "Is Daddy getting married to Mama Sophie today?" Lily whispered to Eleanor, her voice carrying the excited anticipation that only children can truly master. "Yes, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered back, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "Today, they're promising to be a family forever." Richard Whitfield stood near the front, looking more relaxed than he had in 20 years. The transformation in Sophia's father had been gradual but profound. Grief counseling, family therapy, and the simple act of learning to be present had restored something in him that everyone had thought lost forever. He wore a simple navy suit instead of his usual armor of expensive tailoring, and his smile was genuine as he watched the preparations. The past 6 months had brought challenges that tested every bond they'd formed. Derek Morrison's legal troubles had dominated headlines for weeks. Fraud charges, harassment, a pattern of abuse that 3 other women had finally found the courage to report once Eleanor's evidence came to light. His conviction and subsequent imprisonment had freed not just Sophia but several other women who had been living in fear of his retaliation. Marcus had returned to his true calling, using his MIT engineering degree to design affordable housing projects throughout the Bay Area. Richard's connections had opened doors, but Marcus's talent and integrity had walked through them. The partnership between father-in-law and son-in-law had evolved into something neither had expected, genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared love for the women in their lives. Sophia's genetic journey had taken an unexpected turn when new gene therapy trials became available, partially funded by an anonymous donation that everyone suspected came from Richard. The treatments were showing promising results, and while the future remained uncertain, it no longer felt like a death sentence. More importantly, Sophia had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was choosing to live fully in spite of it. The officiant, a kind-faced woman named Pastor Williams, whom Eleanor had recommended, took her place as the small wedding party assembled. The guest list was intimate by design, true friends rather than society obligations, chosen family rather than business associates. Marcus stood at the altar in a charcoal gray suit, his hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Beside him, Dr. James Rodriguez, his best man and fellow engineer, offered an encouraging nod. Marcus had worried about finding someone to stand with him, but the friendships formed through his housing projects had provided exactly what he needed. Someone who knew him for who he truly was. The music began, not the traditional wedding march, but a gentle acoustic guitar version of At Last, played by a local musician Eleanor had discovered. All eyes turned toward the back of the makeshift aisle, where Sophia appeared like a vision crafted from sunset and dreams. Her dress was simple elegance personified, flowing white chiffon that caught the evening breeze, a fitted bodice that showcased her natural beauty without ostentation. Her dark hair was swept up in a loose chignon adorned with the same small white flowers that decorated Lily's hair. But it was her radiant smile, the joy that seemed to emanate from her very being, that took everyone's breath away. Richard offered his arm to walk his daughter down the aisle, a moment both of them had wondered if they'd ever share in peace. As they moved slowly toward Marcus, Richard leaned close to Sophia's ear. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You look exactly like she did on our wedding day." "I hope I'm half as brave as she was," Sophia whispered back. "You're braver," Richard assured her. "You chose love over fear. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." When they reached the altar, the traditional question took on deeper meaning. Who gives this woman to be married to this man? Richard's voice was strong and clear. "Her mother and I do, and we do so with joy and blessing." He placed Sophia's hand in Marcus's, and the gesture felt like healing 22 years in the making. Pastor Williams began the ceremony with words that acknowledged the unusual journey that had brought them to this moment. "We gather today not just to witness the union of Marcus and Sophia, but to celebrate the triumph of hope over despair, of love over fear, of family created by choice rather than chance." The vows they had written were simple but profound, spoken with voices that carried the weight of everything they had overcome together. "Marcus," Sophia began, her voice steady despite the tears flowing freely down her cheeks, "you saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me that love doesn't require perfection, that family isn't defined by blood or bank accounts, and that sometimes the most beautiful futures grow from the darkest moments. I promise to love you with the same courage you showed me on this bridge, to be present for whatever comes, and to help you raise our daughter with all the love she deserves. Marcus's vows were delivered with the quiet strength that had first drawn Sophia to him. Sophia, you brought light back into a world that had gone dark for Lily and me. You showed us that healing is possible, that second chances are real, and that love multiplies instead of divides when shared with an open heart. I promise to love you, not in spite of the challenges we might face, but because of the strength we find in facing them together. I promise to be your partner, your protector when you need it, and your biggest supporter as you write your own story. The ring exchange was interrupted by Lily's enthusiastic participation. As the designated flower girl and ring bearer, she had been practicing her part for weeks. But when the moment came for her to hand over the rings, she had her own addition to make. "Wait!" she announced loudly, causing gentle laughter to ripple through the small gathering. She scrambled down from Eleanor's lap and ran to Marcus and Sophia, throwing her small arms around both of their legs in a fierce hug. "Now we're really a family!" The spontaneous gesture brought tears to every eye present. Pastor Williams, charmed by the interruption, incorporated it seamlessly into the ceremony. And now, with the blessing of the youngest and perhaps wisest member of this new family, Marcus and Sophia, by the power vested in me by the state of California and the love that surrounds you, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was tender, full of promise, witnessed by the bridge where their story began and the family who had helped them write it. As they embraced, the sun settled lower on the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that seemed to celebrate their union. The reception was held at Eleanor's apartment building's rooftop garden, a space that had been transformed with twinkling lights and simple decorations. The meal was potluck style, with dishes contributed by the eclectic mix of friends who had become their chosen family. Construction workers, nurses, engineers, and even Richard's housekeeper, who had insisted on making her famous tres leches cake. As the evening progressed and the lights of San Francisco began to twinkle below, Marcus and Sophia shared their first dance as husband and wife. The song was "At Last Again," but this time Sophia sang along softly in Marcus's ear, her voice carrying all the joy of someone who had finally found her home. "No regrets?" Marcus asked as they swayed together, surrounded by the people they loved most. "Only one," Sophia replied with a mischievous smile. "I regret that it took me so long to find the courage to jump." "Jump? Into this life, into love. Into the beautiful uncertainty of building something real with you." As midnight approached and their small wedding party began to wind down, Marcus, Sophia, and Lily stood once more at the bridge railing, this time safely on the walkway side, holding hands and looking out over the bay that had brought them together. "Tell me the story again," Lily requested, as she had every night for months, "about how Daddy saved Mama Sophie from the sad." And as Marcus began the tale that had become their family's origin story, Eleanor watched from nearby with Richard beside her, both of them marveling at the beautiful complexity of how broken things could be made whole again when touched by unconditional love. The bridge stood eternal beneath the stars, connecting not just two sides of a bay, but three hearts that had found their way to each other through the darkness and into the light. Dear friends, if you're listening to this story and feeling the weight of years on your shoulders, wondering if second chances are just fairy tales for younger hearts, let me tell you something profound. Marcus was 32, Richard was 58, and Eleanor was 78 when their lives transformed forever on that bridge. Age didn't disqualify them from love, redemption, or starting over. It qualified them with the wisdom to recognize what truly matters. Perhaps you're like Richard, realizing you've built walls instead of bridges with your own children. Maybe you're like Eleanor, wondering if your life's purpose is past. Or possibly you're like Marcus, carrying guilt and believing your best days are behind you. But here's the beautiful truth this story whispers to every heart that's forgotten how to hope. It's never too late to choose love over fear, connection over control, healing over hurt. The Golden Gate Bridge in our story isn't just concrete and steel. It's a metaphor for the bridges we can still build between broken relationships, lost dreams, and wounded hearts. Your next chapter might be your most beautiful one yet. Interaction. Questions. What bridges in your own life need rebuilding, and what's the first step you could take today? Like Eleanor, what wisdom or second chance could you offer to someone younger who needs guidance? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters and might inspire someone else's healing journey.